It's another brand new week, and this is Business Morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm Chimeze Obi Iwagu. President Muhammadu Buhari on Friday signed the Companies and Allied Matters Bill 2020, recently passed by the National Assembly. This replaces the Extant Companies and Allied Matters Act 1990, introducing, after 30 years, several corporate legal innovations geared towards enhancing ease of doing business in the country. For more on this and better understanding, and being joined by the Vice Chairman, Law Practice Management Committee of the Nigerian Bar Association, section on business law, and of course, he's also the Managing Partner, Aiden Solicitors, Kunle Ajagbe. And of course, I have in our Abuja studio the Chief Executive Officer and Registrar General of the Corporate Affairs Commission, Mr. Garba Abubakar. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us on the show.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning. All right, let me start off with you, Mr. Ajagbe. What do you make of the new CAMA law? 15 of them introduced. How does it address concerns of commercial lawyers like you and, of course, investors?
Okay. As a matter of fact, the fact that the Companies and Allied Matters Act has been recently reenacted is a welcome development. It's taken quite a long time. And I must immediately correct that it has much more than just 15 innovations. They are countless, and I'm not so sure time will permit us. But there are two things or three things that makes it particularly welcomed. One is the fact that this is the law in Nigeria trying to play catch up with the various developments that have taken place in company law and practice. Secondly, the law is also trying to play catch up as far as technological developments are concerned. And lastly, too, is the fact that the new act, the Companies and Allied Matters Act, is an indication of the government's willingness to walk the talk of the ease of doing business. So it appears to tick those boxes, but it does contain quite a number of interesting and innovative provisions.
Right. Okay, Mr. Abubakar, let me come to you. What makes this new signed CAMA different from the old document from your perspective?
The new law has 870 provisions as against 612 in the Repeal Act. Out of the 870, 167 provisions are completely new, while 91 modified some of the sections in the former law. We have two new legal entities and entity types that have been introduced by the new law. We have limited liability partnerships and limited partnerships. These were not part of what we had in the 1990 Act. Other things, as my colleague said, relates to issues surrounding the ease of doing business initiatives. Modifications have been made to extend to some of the provisions of the former law to allow any individual to register his company without having to go through any lawyer, accountant, or chartered secretary. And we have robust provisions now on incorporated trustees, matters dealing with associations that are registered under Part C of CAMA. As I mentioned in some of our earlier engagements, the provisions of the 1990 Act, as it relates to incorporated trustees, was strictly based on what we had in the Land Perpetual Succession Act. No change was made to the provisions of the Land Perpetual Succession Act. What we did in the course of the review, the reenactment, was to borrow a lot of provisions from the Charities Act of the UK to strengthen the legal framework for incorporated trustees. Then on companies, we have issues surrounding independent directors for public companies, because companies have been relying on the provisions of the Corporate Governance Code to appoint independent directors. Now, this has been codified by the new CAMA, and the CAMA has also defined who is an independent director. So the debate as to who is an independent director has been solved. There are, as I said, 167 new provisions, and is nowhere close to what we had before. But typical of every human endeavor, this cannot be perfect. It's only God's law that is perfect. And our journey has to be gradual. What some African countries did was to adopt the English Companies Act wholesale. We didn't do that in Nigeria because we believe our journey should be gradual. We should put provisions that are consistent with our current state of development as a country. In the UK today, you don't even register any share capital. And you don't even register the objectives for which a company is being established. The presumption is, since a company has the powers of an individual has unlimited capacity, so he can engage in any activity. We didn't adopt that practice in Nigeria. A company still has to file its memorandum showing the objectives for which it is being established. So there are whole gamuts of new provisions that will strengthen the legal framework and that will actually boost the economy.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. Yeah, Mr. Jabwe, let me come to you. How does this CAMA law align with the provisions of the Financial Reporting Council?
Well, thank you very much. Yes, it does align with the provisions because, for one, there's a greater emphasis as far as the New Companies and Allied Matters Act on corporate governance, particularly as regards public companies. And it is obvious that from the Financial Reporting Council, that has been a major thrust of its emphasis. So I see the current provisions of the New Companies and Allied Matters Act as strengthening the intentions of the Financial Reporting Council Act.
Okay, Mr. Abubakar, let me get back to you. With this law in place, what are your expectations from the corporate organizations and the investing public in general?
Our expectation is we have a new legal framework that is robust, and companies should take advantage of some of these new provisions, particularly as it relates to disclosure, because matters relating to disclosure in financial statements, issues of duties or responsibilities of directors, even the insolvency framework that we have. Under the former law, the insolvency framework was more or less a hostile process. It's usually at the mercy of the lender. When a company is insolvent, the company hardly has any chance of coming out based on its own terms and arrangements. With the new law, there is a provision on company voluntary arrangement that allows the company to approach the court to appoint an administrator that will manage the company without the involvement of the lenders. And in doing that, you are preserving jobs because the lender is not the only stakeholder. You have the shareholders, you have the employees. So if that arrangement is approved by the court, at least it will safeguard their company and ensure that it is managed to profitability in a manner that whatever is borrowed will be repaid in a timeous manner. So directors and shareholders should take advantage of these provisions, and they should try to understand this law. We are going to constitute committees to come up with implementation guidelines, to come up with regulations, particularly as it relates to our articles of association. And what we are going to do differently this time around, these committees will not just be in-house. We'll co-opt people that are in the field, lawyers, accountants that are versatile in company law, and issues relating to financial statements. We will have a technological interface where companies will file their financial statements directly with CAC. The issue of paper filing will be eliminated very soon. So, as I said, we need to understand this law. People should take advantage. As soon as it is gazetted, it will be available for people to read. And we don't have the monopoly of knowledge and wisdom in CAC. So we rely on practitioners, company law lawyers, business lawyers, and other practitioners moving forward. Thank you.
Like Mr. Jabwe there. Okay, Mr. Jabwe, let me get back to you. The Act introduces limited liability partnerships and limited partnership, which combines flexibility and tax status of a partnership with the status of limited liability for members of a company. How does this encourage startups?
Okay, very good. It does encourage startups in a tremendous way because, for instance, if you take the nature of a limited liability partnership, it gives to a startup, a business person, many of the key benefits of a limited liability company. And it affords him that chance of, it removes the fear that his liability is unlimited, which is a major impediment for that young entrepreneur who is bustling with ideas, but at the same time, because of certain constraints that he has, if he were to incur a liability, he could be reduced to zero at the onset. So a limited liability, to break it down, it gives him that level of protection. But it's not just for startups alone. Even professional services firms like lawyers, like accountants, and a host of others are in a better position to work more professionally, and it's in accordance with best practices worldwide now. So whether you look at it from the point of view of a startup or an already existing firm of professionals, it's helpful. Even in the financial services industry, this is a brand new corporate vehicle. Lagos State had introduced it before by its own law, but it had not gone nationwide, and it's a big step forward that the CAMA has done this. So that's a major tick going forward as far as the innovations being presented by this act is concerned.
Okay, Mr. Abubakar, let me come back to you. Now, will this act foster corporate governance in a company, considering the varying amendments across public and private companies?
Of course, very well. It will foster corporate governance. As I have said, there are new innovations, particularly as it relates to public companies, the issue of independent directors. Under the new law, you have a minimum, a public company must have a minimum of 3 independent directors. So this has been codified. They don't have a choice than to comply with the provision. These are some of the provisions in the Corporate Governance Code issued by the Financial Reporting Council. Although the code has gone further to talk about independent executive and other things, but at least we have a minimum acceptable definition based on what is obtained in the law, not just regulation. Other issues relate to duties and responsibilities of directors. There are more robust provisions now in the existing law, and it will ensure accountability, because the whole essence of corporate governance is to ensure accountability and to provide the medium through which companies will be better managed. So directors will be accountable for their actions, and they will be accountable not just to the company, but also to the commission, because if they have a fiduciary relationship to the company, and they have to disclose where there is any conflict of interest involved. So all these provisions have been strengthened, and in the event of any breach, the law has provided for the establishment of an administrative proceedings committee by CAC, which will be chaired by the Registrar General. Some of the disputes that we used to have can now be managed administratively through mediation. Companies don't have to go to court in some of this, to resolve some of these disputes. So, as I said, there are whole gamut of provisions that we cannot actually exhaust at this sitting. But it will actually strengthen the corporate governance framework for our companies.
Absolutely. Okay, Mr. Jagbe, let me get back to you. As a lawyer, what are company secretaries telling you mainly about the fact that it's now optional for private companies to have a company secretary and for small-sized companies to hire audit firms at their AGMs?
Okay, there are 2 sides to that, and I'm happy that you raised this question. For small companies, for managers and promoters of small companies, it's a welcome piece of news, because from a purely financial point of view, it means that they may not have to use the services of, or they are no longer obliged to engage a company secretary, as was previously the case, and that may mean that they can save some money. So that's a plus for them. However, looking further down the road, even though they are no longer mandated or obliged to appoint a company secretary, to the extent that compliance as an overarching obligation of every company, small or big or mid-size, is a continuing activity. So even if small companies do not have a company secretary anymore, they still need to engage with the services of a professional advisor. I must say, in this case, a lawyer, to ensure that they are on the straight and narrow path of compliance. But for business owners, yes, this is good for them. I'm sorry, please, what was the second question?
Hello?
Yes, sorry, please. What was the second question?
Well, I guess you have basically answered the questions I asked. Let
Well,
me
if
get
I
to...
may,
Yeah, go ahead.
yes, please. If I may also use this opportunity to also speak with some of the issues as far as the Corporate Affairs Commission is concerned. I think this is a wonderful time and a wonderful opportunity for the Corporate Affairs Commission. It has a major and pivotal role as far as the economy is concerned. As a practitioner myself, I am not unaware of many of the challenges which it has had to contend with. I think there are certain things the CAC is doing right, but with this new piece of legislation, there are things that it must necessarily get right institutionally. So, for instance, the full optimization of this act requires that the CAC must have a robust information and technological infrastructure. I cannot speak as to the full extent to which it does have that. I know that there are glitches here and there, but that's a challenge that it definitely must now have to contend with. On the other side, too, for lawyers and the general public who has had to interact with the Corporate Affairs Commission, it's a welcome development that the law has also now introduced the Administrative Proceedings Committee, which means that many items which form points of grievances with the CAC do not immediately have to go to court. Rather, the law says that we must now go to what is essentially an administrative tribunal. And this places challenges on the institutional capacity of the Corporate Affairs Commission, particularly to ensure that decisions are given in a prompt manner and in a manner that is enabling of business and commercial activity as well, because all of these things, all of this law that has just recently been assented to is ultimately geared towards enhancing the ease of doing business. And I believe and hope that the CAC will be able to continue to play that role.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ajabe. Okay, good enough. We have the CSCA CEO there, Mr. Abubakar. Well, Mr. Abubakar, you heard what the concerns Mr. Ajabe has raised. What would you have to say about that?
These are legitimate concerns, but I want to assure Mr. Ajagu and the general public that CAC will be up to its responsibilities. We've started the necessary engagement to have a robust technological solution, even before the law was assented to. So this is work in progress. I agree that the present application does not cover the entire aspect of our operations. It only covers new registration. So we are very soon will deploy the post-registration model. And the good thing about technology is we are not doing anything new. Other countries have done similar things, and they have achieved more or less perfection on that. So all we need to do is to look at what other countries have done and develop something that will be consistent and that will meet the expectation of our clients and customers. So we are working on that, and our target is to have an end-to-end electronic solution before the end of the year. And as I said, for the Administrative Proceedings Committee, we will develop practice directions, we will develop rules that will govern the proceedings of this committee. And in doing that, I had earlier mentioned that we'll not do it alone. We'll involve practitioners, company law experts, in the committee that will design all these processes and procedures. So we don't have the monopoly of wisdom and knowledge. But what I can assure Mr. Ajagu and the general public is CAC will deliver on this, and will deliver within the shortest time possible. Thank you.
And we will hold you to that, Mr. Abubakar. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Mr. Garba Abubakar is the Chief Executive Officer and Registrar General of the Corporate Affairs Commission. And of course, we have the Managing Partner, Aid and Solicitor, Kunle Ajabe. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being part of the show. All right, we'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll look at the outcome of the presidential policy dialogue recently organized by the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. To stay with us. As the effects of the COVID-19 disruptions continued to ravage not just the global economy, but Nigeria in particular, the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, under the umbrella of the organized private sector, found it worthy to engage the federal government on policy issue The Presidential Policy Dialogue session held last week deliberated on issues bordering on economy as they relate to the mandate of the present administration to take the economy to the next level. And so, what was the outcome of this policy dialogue? I'm being joined by the Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Muda Yusuf. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Yusuf.
Thank you very much. It's
yes,
a pleasure.
This presidential policy dialogue, why was that important at this time?
Well, it's important because it is very critical, especially at a time like this, to deepen conversation, to deepen consultation, to deepen communication between the public and the private sector. So what we put together is within the framework of public-private dialogue, because we recognize that the two sectors have to complement each other. First, in the policy formulation process, it is important that policies are evidence-based so that they can have the right kind of impact and get the right kind of outcomes. And the best way to make a policy evidence-based is through regular interaction between the private sector and the public sector. So this kind of interaction has a way of enriching the policy process in terms of formulation. It has a way of also enriching the implementation process. It has a way of also giving a feedback to the policymakers. Because we have seen instances where people conceptualize policies, they have very good intentions, but down the line, you have a completely different scenario. You have a completely different things happening at the level of implementation. So that is one. Secondly, it is very clear, particularly now, that the government needs the support of the private sector in the area of funding. And there's a whole lot of funding gaps at the federal government level, at the state government level, and at the local government level. So this kind of conversation will help to identify and also describe an appropriate framework to encourage the inflow of private sector capital. Because we are not doing much of that yet, because of a whole lot of issues around the risk of investment, around the legislative framework, the regulatory framework, and all of that. So we need a whole lot to do to attract private capital, because the challenges of investments and of improving infrastructure is very huge.
Now, if I may come in there, this is not the first time you are having this sort of dialogue, I mean, presidential dialogue. And of course, we've also seen many seminars, conferences, meetings, discussing same issues. How much difference will this make, really?
You see, for as long as we have challenges to deal with, we cannot afford to stop this kind of conversation. Economic management process, economic advancement process is work in progress. There will always be issues around which we need to communicate, we need to dialogue. That is the spirit that is driving this. Dialogue and consultation is a continuous process. Now we have the vice president, with whom we had the privilege of interfacing with directly. The vice president is the chairman of the Economic Sustainability Committee. They just released the Economic Sustainable Plan. And he will also drive the implementation process. So a few concerns that we have around implementation, around even the content of it, there is no better person to deal with that than the vice president. And of course, he came to that dialogue with some key officials of government. The Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment was there. The special advisor to the president on ease of doing business was there, and a whole lot of other relevant key officials of government. So the whole idea is to ensure that we continue to sustain the momentum of engagement, which we should not be tired of doing. Because every now and then there are gaps here and there, either in policies, in regulation, in institutional reforms, and all of that. And the only way to keep these things in the front burner is to continue to engage. And we are happy that the vice president is always forthcoming when it comes to issues of engagement with the private sector.
Now, a number of issues were put on the table, by the Lagos Chamber, the LCCI president, and of course, some other stakeholders who also have their own concerns. Then one of the issues, of course, is the issue of infrastructure. And in response, the VP spoke extensively on the importance of partnership, with the government and the private sector in infrastructure delivery. He did cite the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, Second Niger Bridge as example. How much of PPP have we really seen in infrastructure development?
Well, we have not made much progress in the area of PPP in infrastructure, in the area of attracting private sector capital. And this is part of the reason why we have to sustain this kind of engagement.
Now, did he explain how he intends to go about engaging the private sector into infrastructure development?
Well, one of the very important points he made was the issue around de-risking the environment. Because infrastructure investment is a long-term investment. Infrastructure investment is also highly capital intensive. So for you to get private capital into that kind of space, whether it is domestic capital or foreign capital, you must build some confidence around it. You must be able to reduce the level of risk. So he talked about de-risking the process, looking at all the framework that is necessary to give investors the right kind of confidence so that investment can come into that place. And he also talked about the issue specifically about private sector involvement in rail infrastructure. He made the point that all over the world, the private sector hardly invests in the building of rail tracks. What the private sector does most is the management of the process, that the rail transportation, the coaches, and all of that. And that is why he said there has to be sovereign investment in the construction of the track, after which the private sector will be involved in the management of the rail transportation, in investment in coaches and all of that. But more importantly, it's about reducing the risk and inspiring confidence of investors around investment in infrastructure. And it's not just a federal government issue. Not many state governments are talking about PPP in the delivery of infrastructure. And we are having a situation where increasingly many of them are finding it difficult to deliver infrastructure. And if you cannot deliver infrastructure, you cannot grow your economy. You cannot create jobs. You cannot reduce poverty. So these things, there's a strong nexus between infrastructure development and even the economic development, either at the federal level, at the state level, or at the local government level. So it's something that we need to, get all the governments at all levels to really appreciate and begin to develop framework around how they can attract private sector capital. Because this economy is big. The opportunities are big. The demand for services is also huge. So that is good business.
Yeah, he did. He also mentioned the use of pension funds for infrastructure development. How safe is that?
Well, I think it is safe. And he also said that in using pension funds for infrastructure, there will be a very strong risk management framework around it. Because pension funds, these are people's money. These are savings for purposes of retirement and all of that. So we need to be very careful the way we deploy the use of pension funds. And he also emphasized that the risk management framework around the utilization of pension funds for infrastructure development will be very robust and it will be very strong. Just as we have, there's quite a number of investment of pension funds in treasury base, in government bonds. These are sovereign investments. And when you have such investment, the risk is almost zero for as long as you have a country. When you have a sovereign-backed investment, it gives a lot of comfort. So he emphasized that. And right now we have about 10.8 trillion worth of assets in pension funds. So we can get a portion of that to invest in areas of infrastructure where we know that the risk is very, very low. And I think it's be a win-win, both for the citizens and also for government and everybody.
Now, what about this idea of developing broadband infrastructure? What does he mean by
yes.
that?
He spoke extensively around that. Because IT is becoming increasingly very, very critical to the progress that we make as a country. No matter what sectors we talk about, you need very strong IT support to support it. And this broadband infrastructure is very, very critical to the delivery of this IT support. Before now, many of the telcos have complained bitterly about the burden, the challenges, and the cost of right-of-way across the country. And many states, unfortunately feel that the best way to make money is to impose a lot of tax and cost on these people, forgetting that there are wider implications, there are wider benefits for their environment if the right-of-way is made easier, if the telcos are able to lay their fiber optic cables, and you have very speedy internet access. It will impact development in a whole lot of ways. So I think the federal government with the state governments are beginning to come to some kind of understanding. People are beginning to see reason as to why we need to be more friendly, be more tolerant, be more accommodating of the requests of the telcos. And things are getting better. Look at the state, Lagos State, for instance. There are these fiber optic cable all over the place now. There's a unification of the fiber optic infrastructure so that all the key internet companies or telcos can key into that. 3,000 kilometers worth of fiber optic cables are now being laid in Lagos. So that is going to bring a whole lot of value and impact on development and on productivity across a whole lot of sectors.
All right, let's look at investment climate and, of course, ease of doing business. That was also part of the issues raised there. We know we've had challenging in interest rate environment. We have the exchange rate issues and all of that. Recently, we had ShopRite announcing its exit from Nigeria. Well, we're not still sure about the reason why they want to go, but it's not far-fetched from some of the ease of doing business problems that every other investor encounters. So what was their response, to this, particularly, both from the Vice President and, of course, the Minister of Trade?
Well, the issue of the investment climate, again, is work in progress. We have made some progress in terms of, moving almost 35 steps in the ease of doing business ranking. But the Vice President also admitted that we still have a whole lot of challenges around the issue of ease of doing business. As I speak to you now, a lot of businesses are having challenges with foreign exchange liquidity. To get their raw materials, to get their equipment is a whole lot of nightmare. The policies are not clear, there is so much uncertainty and all of that. There are also issues around institutions, particularly the Nigeria Customs Service. It's one of the biggest challenges that businesses face, especially around issues of valuation, issues of classification, issues of arbitrariness, and there's so much impunity. So all of these issues are issues that we regularly engage the government about. For instance, in the Customs Service, you get a cargo, you have a value, and you have evidence of the value of the item that you have bought. The Customs Service will impose a different value, sometimes as high as 50% or more of the value. You have a valuation cleared. The man at the gate will say that you have not paid the right value. You get out of the port. The FOE will say you have not paid the right value. They will confiscate, impound your container, take it to the FOE office, and begin another round of valuation. So all this arbitrariness around trade facilitation, we need to deal with it. Now, we have not made progress at all in the area of this customs administration and interface with the business community. And we appeal to government to do something very quickly about it.
Yeah, in all of this dialogue and all this, are you getting the desired, goal, the desired objective? Are you getting what you really want to achieve? Are they responding positively? Are you seeing any changes? Are you seeing the government doing changes in some of these issues?
Incrementally, yes. And the previous segment, you discussed about the CAMA.
The CAMA, yeah.
It is it's an outcome of this kind of engagement. We had a legislation that governs business that is 30 years old. In an environment that is so dynamic that things are changing. We have to wait for 30 years for us to now begin to have a revised legislation. It's part of the outcome. So, and gradually, incrementally, we see changes because we cannot afford to give up on this economy.
Absolutely.
We cannot afford to give up on anything.
Yeah.
So this engagement has to continue. It has to be sustained so that we continue to improve this environment for the benefit of the economy and for the benefit of the citizens.
We will never give up.
We cannot afford to.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yusuf, for your
Thank you very
time.
much.
Dr.
Thank
Muda
you.
Yusuf is the Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And a quick look at the global oil market as prices climbed this morning, supported by Saudi optimism on Asian demand and Iraqi pledges to deepen supply cuts, although uncertainty over a deal to shore up the U.S. economic recovery capped gains. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures rose 50 cents to $41.72 a barrel, while Brent crude futures were up 40 cents at $44.80 a barrel. Both benchmark contracts fell on Friday, hurt by demand concerns, but Brent still ended the week up 2.5%, with WTI up 2.4%. Saudi Arabian Aramco's chief executive Amin Nasser said on Sunday he sees oil demand rebounding in Asia as economies gradually open up after the easing of coronavirus lockdown. And for a quick review and outlook of the activities at the Nigerian equities market, we have Temple back. Hello, Temple. Good morning. Good to see you. Well, it was all green at the equities market last week. Just wondering if that was for real.
Yes, it was for real, and that's a whole lot as a result of a whole lot of bargain hunting and some sort of bullish performance that we saw dovetailing all the way from last week into this week. So we're up last week only by some 1.41%, settling at 25,000, and of course we got the equity capitalization back up to 13 trillion naira. This is something that is worth celebrating actually in the markets today. Of course, we know that if we look at the volume of transactions and just talking about the activity level now, a whole lot of activities there, 1.06 billion units of shares compared to what we did in the preceding week where we saw just a little lower than that. We were up last week only by some 21.4%, and of course the value of the transactions was also up by some 51.4% in the market. Major contributors in terms of volume include FBN Holdings and of course UACN, which was down by some 11% last week, week on week, and of course you got a couple of other companies there. Now we're seeing this all bargain hunting in the market because some of the companies' earnings that are beginning to trickle in for the H1 and, of course, Q2 2020 have actually been quite positive, and even some of them are even declaring some interim dividend in the market. That's the reason why we're seeing some kind of comeback into the space. Look at the banking space. This space in particular, we're expecting the tier 1 names to this week release their numbers for the Q2 2020 and of course H1 2020, and possibly for the top tier 1 names will also try to, folks are very positive about that, hoping that they will release some or declare some interim dividends. So we got the likes of GT Bank, Stanbic IBTC, and of course UBA, all positive for the week that was passed. And of course consumer goods side of the market, Guinness was positive. Then you got a couple of other names. Then Flour Mill, which also declared its earnings, was also positive for the week. Industrial goods of the market, Kiotex was up by some 4% plus, and of some 0.3%. Your Boa Cement was up. Kiotex has declared some 1.25 kobo in terms of interim dividends for the markets, and that's where investors are watching. So we got Mr. Fakaijo, who's a member of the Nigerian Stock Exchange, and of course a trader, joining us on phone. Mr. Fakaijo, thanks for joining us on the program. Talk us through what to expect this week. Given the fact that we've seen some bullish sentiments in the past week, are we likely to see some profits taken this week?
Well, it's most unlikely. Although what is stopping the week with Boa Cement having put the market in a negative position at the start of the market, that may not really be sustained. But I think in actual sense, the market is actually adjusting to the reality that all is not too bad with respect to the outcome of the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown. So I believe strongly that the investors are going to consolidate their positions, and that will also translate to more transactions. But one hiccup that the market may suffer is the official release of the CBN, of the unification of exchange rates. I think that definitely is not going to go down well with foreign portfolio investors that have been the mainstay of the market for quite some years. And I think their return to the market is going to be predicated on this. But be that as it may, with the local investors still continue what they have been doing, I believe strongly that this very week we definitely follow the trend of what we saw last week. Not too many securities actually gained traction, but I think with the few that we saw, they are not likely, investors are not likely to take profit on those securities. So we may
they'll
likely
continue to watch
see
the low
trend
valuations.
continue as we saw last week.
Absolutely. We'll wait to see how things pan out eventually for the next trading sessions that we have for this week. Thank you so much, Mr. Rotimi Fakayejo, stockbroker with the Nigerian Stock Exchange. We appreciate your time. Back to you, Chimeze.
See how that goes. Okay, we'll take a break, and when we come back, we do a quick call to London and then get back to you, Temple. All right, let's get updates from the street of London with Juliana Olainka. Hello, Juliana. Good morning. Good to see you. It's a brand new week and a lot of expectations out there. More importantly, is the GDP number expected this week, with analysts expecting UK to plunge into deepest slump on record. How is the week kicking off already in London?
Good morning, Chimeze. Well, it's a beautiful weekend, and it's a pretty beautiful start to the week, a solid start on the FTSE all-share. It opened up in positive territory, up by about 67 points. This is despite, over the weekend, the spat between Washington and Beijing increasing with Trump's threats to outlaw TikTok and WeChat. And then, of course, there has been, across the weekend, a significant rise in coronavirus cases. So that second wave that British Prime Minister Boris Johnson mentioned a couple of weeks ago has truly landed on British shores. But as you said, this week, all eyes are going to be on that Q2 UK GDP data, which is due out on Wednesday. Some analysts expect GDP to drop by a massive 21%. Hopefully it won't be higher than that. But if it is 21%, that is the worst G7 nation UK Q2 GDP drop on record. I believe France and Italy were anywhere between 12 and 13%, so there will be significant worries. As you said, this would be one of the deepest recessions that Britain has seen. Certainly the first recession, the first technical recession we've been in since the 2008 financial crisis, so that's 12 years ago. There is going to be lots of speculation as to why GDP has been so bad and such a slump if you compare it to other nations that have also, of course, been impacted by the pandemic. Many suggestions are that, you know, we were too late getting into lockdown, too late getting out of lockdown. There's a lot of coronaphobia, although if you look at the pictures, you would think lots of Britons are going out because I'm telling you, tens of thousands were flocking to the shores to enjoy the summer weather, but they're not doing what the economy needs, which is going out, buying, spending money on clothes. So it's going to be a pretty tense week, I would say. But 21% drop in UK GDP will be absolutely massive.
And are there corporate news to look out for today and, of course, the week?
Well, there is corporate news. You know, we've been speaking about the labour market over the past couple of months. I suspect we'll be speaking about it throughout the rest of the year. There was a new research conducted by Chartered Institute of Personal and Development, and that has shown a 50% jump in the number of private and public companies that say that they will be letting go of their staff. We actually heard from Pret a Manger earlier today. Pret a Manger, a really famous cafe sandwich shop that rely heavily on 9-to-5 workers and people commuting into the office. They've already closed stores, they've already made redundancies, and now they say even the jobs that they will be maintaining, staff will be cutting their hours. There's one just along where our studio is, and already they're closing their doors at about 2 p.m. So the labour market is in increased focus. We're expecting unemployment data tomorrow. Will we see a significant increase in the amount of unemployment? I'm not so sure, but we're certainly going to get that by the end of the year. There are talks that it could be between 1 million and 3 million job losses. So the labour market is, again, going to be an increased focus.
And in another development, footballers and their image rights are coming under increasing scrutiny as the UK tax authorities look to clamp down on loopholes in the way players are paid. How much do we know about these findings by accountants firm UHY Harker Young?
Well, this is a story that, comes round every other year. Not surprising, really, especially people that live in the UK. English Premier League footballers do have flamboyant lifestyles. And even though they are earning eye-watering amounts of money, and you'd think that they should have a great accountant, many of them don't. And this information has been received by a Freedom of Information Act. And apparently there are 246 professional players that are currently under investigation with the HMRC, and this is about their images rights. So, of course, many of them have six-figure weekly salaries from the club, but on top of that, they have many endorsement deals. Now, when you're earning a certain amount of money here in Britain, you have to pay a high income tax. I believe it's 45% is what you pay, but there are suggestions or allegations against many of these professional football players. As what they're doing is they're taking their salary, and then for the extra added salary, which they're earning through endorsements and through their images, they are collecting this money through a corporation, a company. And with a corporation company, you only pay 19% tax rather than the 45% tax. And therein lies the loophole. HMRC said they're just doing what they typically do, which is just checking and balancing and making sure everybody is contributing to the national pot as much as they used to. But yes, this is a story that we're familiar with here in Britain.
All right, Juliana, we'll certainly get back to you later in the day for more update. And back here on the debt and currency market, Temple is back.
Yes. So let's quickly look at the NASD O2C just before we move on. It was positive week on week last week, 75 basis points. We got the market cap still at 518 billion naira. Volume and value of transaction. We got some key contributions from First Mortgage Bank and, of course, WAMCO, which is your peak milk maker. All of those actually recorded some gain. I think WAMCO was actually up by some 3%. Look at the FGN bonds, which is about the debt markets now. We got some week on week. We had 4 out of the 5 trading days, recording some gains. A lot of investors, kept on demanding for papers, especially the auction papers, auction bonds, like the 2026 and, of course, the 2049. Then you remember the 2035 paper was also on demand for the greater part of last week. At the end of the day, we saw the market enjoying some profit taking from some of these investors. We got the 2050 paper and, of course, the 2045 recording some spreads that side of the market. Then if we look at the NCB side of the market, we got some retail demands on that space, especially for the July paper, which settled around 3.3%, and, of course, our October paper, which is 3%. Now, deals for Friday only was just 8, valued at 1.31 billion naira. And if we look at the open market operations end of things, investors had actually been muted on these papers for some time now. But last week, they actually returned on Friday specifically with some key interest. And, of course, we saw demands around the longer end of the curve. The 2021 papers enjoyed some key demands, basically. Now, investors are hoping, and of course, dealers in the market are hoping that this week there will be some kind of CBN OMO auctions in the market so that we can speak to get some more interest in this space. Again, one of the key points that investors are being conscious about is the CRR debit. This is something that will also determine the interest of investors, a lot of these dealers in this space. One other point is the release of the $1.5 billion that the federal government is expecting from World Bank. All hands on deck at this point, waiting for these funds to come on board. This will also help a lot of those portfolio investors that have keyed into the T-bills, bonds, and, of course, the OMO space to be able to repatriate their investments and dividends. Something that we'll continue to watch to see how it pans out this week. Chimeze.
Absolutely. Well, it's a brand new week, and I'm sure it's going to be all bright for the markets. Yeah. Thank you. Well, on that note, we draw the curtain on today's edition of the program. Thank you for watching. I'm Chimeze Obi Iwagu.